Hello, friends. This is the Alphalist podcast. I am your host, Toby. The goal of the Alphalist podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for their company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply. So, welcome to the Alphalist podcast. I am your host, Toby, and today I have a man with a very complicated name. His name is Niilo Säämänen. Was that correct, Niilo?
Well done. Säämänen, but almost correct.
Säämänen.
Well done.
And he is the VP Engineering of Wolt. And Wolt is a crazy company that, I don't know, a few people might have on the radar for a while. I think Wolt launched somewhere last year in Berlin, and it somehow got to my attention through people working in competing companies, and now Wolt delivers my food at home. So most likely I will order a pizza tonight or a few pizzas because I have visitors through Wolt, and it's kind of magic. Because it just feels a bit different and a bit better. So the user experience is much better. And they almost got $1 billion in funding, as far as I know. And they are in the acquisition process with DoorDash, as far as I know. Niilo, did I forget anything?
No, I think you're pretty much on the point there. Yes. I like the fact that you mentioned that we try to do it better. That's what we try to be, better. In product, in engineering, in efficiencies. That's kind of the aim of the company.
And that's also the aim of our talk today. So we want to talk about effective and impactful tech organizations today because Niilo seems to have some experience with that. But maybe we just start off with my first and famous question. What is your nerd path? I mean, how did you get where you are? How did you get into engineering and when?
Yeah, my
and
nerd
why?
path. Yes. Why is always good. My nerd path starts actually quite early. It depends on what's early. I think I was 14 when I made my first commercial website back in the day in 1996, 1997. I was still in high school and I realized that this web stuff is cool back in the day with Windows 95, and I built my first commercial website. Then I built a few of them. But then I actually that was when I first started thinking about the internet technologies as a cool thing to work on. But then I took a little bit of a side path and became a radio host for a while. So I went into radio host and audio productions and kind of doing DJing until I realized there's no money and no kind of career prospects in this really. So I went back to my earlier love, which is engineering, after this stint in journalism. I studied engineering for a while. I started my own company, I think, year 2 of studying engineering. Also taught in the Polytechnic where I was back in the day, because there was a lack of people who actually knew how to build internet-related products. But yeah, I mean, from that point onwards, I think what my love for tech actually isn't really about engineering. It's about two things. It's about building the best things for consumers or for customers. So how do we create customer value through technology? That's the thing I've been caring about quite a lot, especially through kind of this craft excellence. So how can you create something that is at the both times as a creation beautiful and useful for the end customers? And this has been kind of my journey ever since from those early days. So I used to build kind of these rich interaction applications on the web and used to build games and a physics engine and some random things along the way. Used to also actually run design and engineering in the previous companies. I've always been between these customers or humans and technology as a personal nerd. So my nerdism is more related to the humane engineering aspects of this. I've built some crappy backends, some glorious front ends, and ended up here. I don't know, did you want to know more about the career or more philosophy aspects of this? This is how I would answer.
Okay. I'd be like first curious. I mean, Wolt is mostly an app company, one could say, right? Like the most of the user experience happens in the app. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the kind of apps are the flagship of the company. Yes, you could say that.
And I guess you have then different apps, like one for the consumer, one for the restaurant, and so on. And I'm always like curious to like at least briefly understand your tech stack. What is it built with?
Sure. So I mean, our kind of consumer apps are native. I think in general you should always go native if you have the engineers and you're building something very consumer centric. So with native Swift and native Kotlin for Android and iOS clients for the consumer side. For the courier application, we built it with React Native as a cross-platform solution. We built it with React Native, I think, for the last 6 years from its first inception onwards. And for merchants, we have an iPad application. And then we do some cool cross-platform projects with Kotlin as well on the newer kind of business line stuff. So some retail picker applications and maybe some kind of warehouse management stuff as well, built with Flutter. So quite a wide range of mobile technologies in that.
And the backend?
Yeah. Yes. So for backend, we have the classic founder Python, which is maybe like 40% of Wolt. We use Scala for our logistics and courier platform side, and then we use Kotlin for most of the new services we build. So we have 3 major backend languages at the moment in use. There's some Rust in a small microservice there, and some Golang in some marketing technologies, but mostly it's these three.
And how big is your engineering org?
So engineering these days is about 350 people in engineering in Wolt across 5 different countries where we have product and engineering people located.
And does that mean that because you have like different technologies, different tech stacks, and so on, do you apply the popular Spotify model that Spotify once kick-offed, and I don't know if they actually use it, or like how do you drive your organization?
Well, I think it's maybe like a bit of a modified, or I don't know, evolved Spotify model. But how we do our technical organization is really kind of end-to-end teams with autonomy, accountability, and ownership of their customers, and they're always put kind of aligned towards a business goal or a customer group. So the whole idea is that the organization, also reporting lines and everything else, should be optimized for the biggest impact you're trying to get out of things. So as an example, a courier delivery experience team is building what is a courier's daily life, and how do couriers really kind of, what is a good life and a good kind of working relationship for a courier, and how are they efficient in finding their addresses and taking the food and kind of doing their work. And that is kind of a team, and that team is end-to-end capable from back-end to front-end to design to analytics to whatever is needed to be able to run those things. So that's in a nutshell.
And do they also own the business?
So I mean, the business is kind of split in a way. So Wolt works in a very kind of distributed way, in kind of a distributed way, so that the team on the product side will own, like there's a product lead and team lead, and they kind of own on the product side of it. But on kind of operational side, we have 23 countries we're operating in, and each country is unique, and this business is very local, very city by city, very country by country. So there are different requirements in these different parts. So what we try to do in kind of product and engineering is we build this platform. So we go platform first almost always. So we try to build the tooling and this platform that enables the countries and the operations to actually, so basically the business, to solve their problems. So try to get as efficient as possible ways for them to solve their problems. But we give them a lot of leeway in solving them differently, because, I don't know, the logistics in Budapest is different than it is in Helsinki. Or the kind of the needs of the merchants in Greece are very different than they are from Tokyo or Japan in general. So we try to give them a pretty wide ranging platform around it. So there's not a direct mapping with business and product, because there's many stakeholders on the business side basically.
So business is a user of your platform then, and like just as an example, how does it look like for a city like Hamburg? I mean, we have, I think, almost 2 million people living here. How big is the team? If you can give
for Hamburg.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have a city-specific teams. I mean, from an operational perspective or from a tech perspective? Wow.
From operational perspective.
So we do a kind of we do country teams. So country has a team that can handle different. We don't need to have a city specific team. So typically we have country specific teams. So the Germany team is based in Berlin mostly.
And if you, as a Berlin-based team, have requirements to product, like how does that work?
Yeah.
If
So
you,
I
if
mean,
you wanna...
yeah, so it depends a bit on the operational area. So it's the same as we have the teams based on domains. So for example, in this courier delivery experience example, we have operations managers in the countries who are kind of understanding the local kind of needs of the fleets and what is happening in the logistics sphere of this area. And that we have a kind of regular feedback from one-on-one with this, but we also have these operational manager calls where we have a really tight coupling with the product and operational side to understand the potential from the product side and the needs from the operational side, on top of the typical road mapping and other things. But in general, I think the whole point of this model, what we're trying to do, is put the context really close to the teams. So we try to do this very regular. I think we have a bi-weekly catch-up in this regard, where we align the kind of operational expectations of the kind of courier operations and the actual teams themselves. So the model is really working on a lot of discussions together.
I can imagine. I mean, it must be like then a huge group of people, and I guess like 50 people in each country, or how does it look like for Germany, for example?
Well, it depends on the size of the country. It can be anything from 50 to 100, depending on the country operations.
Okay, and then like jumping back to tech, how do you drive product then? I mean, do you have a product manager in each of the teams, or do you have like one big visionary who sets the direction, or how does that work?
We have a mixture of both. We have loud visionaries in the company as well, but mostly we try to do it so that every team has always a product lead or product manager. We call them product leads, and a team lead. So we have an engineering and tech and product counterpart typically in teams. Each of those teams kind of, as they said, own the domain, and the product is the one who kind of understands the business, understands the customers, tries to bring the context to the team to kind of be that kind of a leader and glue between all these competencies and all these kind of requirements inside. So I mean, like, you don't have a direct relationship having like 50 people shouting to an engineering team what they should be building. There is some buffer, and there's some processes around prioritization, and we do biannual road mapping. So typically try to do like half a year roadmaps with different tiers of features based on impact estimations and input from the operations, or in general from everywhere else.
And do you personally work with like every team on formulating the roadmap, or how does that work, or how do the teams do that? Do they do it on their own, or?
Well, we have we have 44 teams at this point. So I don't personally work with every team to figure out. So we actually give the teams quite a lot of leeway. So we have, if you think of this more goal setting framework kind of way, we have company level goals that are then tied into kind of areas. So basically there's like 5 or 6 company level goals that are then kind of matched by group or team specific roadmaps, and the teams themselves do the roadmaps. So they have the input from the operations, they have the input from data, input from user research, input from intuition, kind of whatever is needed, and they formulate based on that and a best estimate of what are the biggest impact projects to be done. And then we kind of hash that out with our counterparts and debate, as you always do in these things, quite a lot, because prioritization is one of the hardest things to get right. But we do give, like, the important thing is, I think we do give a lot of leeway for the team to really understand, like, because they should be understanding the context of their customers really well. So then they are the ones who are finalizing their roadmaps. We do a lot of input, we debate a lot, we challenge a lot, but in the end, the team owns their roadmap. And if you don't own your roadmap, it's kind of hard to be committed to it. So you need to be able to kind of influence it in the same way.
Okay, so that means you sit down, like, as a leadership group, like the 6 founders, you and maybe like a few others, sit down once per year to discuss the yearly goals, and then teams look at the yearly goals and you communicate them, and then they say, okay, yeah, in this quarter I want to do this, or in this half year I want to do this and this and this, and then they execute against the company goals, like like similar to like an OKR model, right?
It's kind of like a very loose OKR model. So we don't like we're not kind of tied into like having strict OKRs for everything, but the company level goals are roughly OKRs. I think the one thing important to note is that we do this half a yearly roadmap. So we do this kind of six month roadmap. We tier them to tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, maybe tier 4, exactly because the world changes faster than the roadmaps can. So we try to balance the fact that kind of how much do you want to do planning and how much do you want to do execution. So we try to kind of have the overhead of planning to be like roughly every half a year, because along the way we change the priorities. So there are differences that change. For example, last year, we were just finished, or pretty much finishing our road mapping for H2, when we realized that from business and from competitors and from wherever where we kind of made this kind of analysis of what we need to do really is to build a subscription model for Wolt. And then we and this came kind of bit much from the kind of higher ups in the leadership side of like, hey, we need to really build this. We re-geared 6 teams to focus on it. Basically, we repurposed roadmaps for this. Had one team lead it, had 6 teams contributing, and built one in 3 months. And this kind of ability to execute fast and be very reactive to market changes and potential to what we need to build is something I think is kind of at the heart of what makes our model efficient. So when the teams are really owning their own topics, when you work on this, you're not kind of tying yourself into the fact that you are promised to exactly ship these 6 things in these 6 months. But it's more about you own these topics. There's a more important thing, you can change your way. And I think it works pretty well for us. So building an environment where there's resiliency and capability to react within the organization to the changes in the world. It's operating at the edge of chaos is another way of putting it, but we like it. Chaos and impact. It's a good combo.
It sounds as if you're not dogmatic about anything. Is that correct? Or you try to be not dogmatic about anything?
We're dogmatic about culture. Kind of like the kind of the way we approach things. We're very dogmatic. How do we do ownership? What do we expect from people when they join this company? What do we expect from ownership? Like, what do we expect from this entrepreneurial mindset and this idea that there are no other people's problems? You have an issue to solve, you solve it, or you find the people you need to solve it and you move forward. Instead of waiting for somebody else to remove your blockers, you remove your blockers yourself. It's a very kind of cultural approach into building things. I also believe it's a really great approach for talented individuals. So if you're really good at what you do, you typically want to have the power to do the things you need to do to get to where you need to go. And our model's whole point is to basically empower these smart and capable people and try to reduce the overhead of, for example, kind of command and control chains or these communication chains, and just try to have the power with the people who can solve the problems.
Okay, so first try it yourself, then like include everyone you need to include, and drive change, right? Instead of waiting for others to drive change.
Yeah, and then there's a big kind of like maybe kind of to step back. So there is a lot of structure around this as well, of course. So we have how do we do the teams and how do the teams really operate? There's a bunch of kind of codification and playbooks around that topic, but it all comes down to the fact that we want the teams to take the ownership of their own areas. So it's not like we're chaotic in a sense of just randomly doing things, but it's more like we try to optimize for the right output rather than for a predictability of things.
And you try to limit synchronization in a way, and context switching.
Yeah, I mean, I think like minimizing dependencies is the other side of this sort of work, which I'm personally very passionate about. So like if you have the end-to-end capability in a team, one of the main reasons for that is that you don't have to do handovers of work. Everybody can contribute to every code base. Every code base has designated owners the typical model where everybody will kind of like certain people will review the code. So you have the kind of accountability and maintenance part of things still in place, but the teams can really move as fast as they need to. Preferably building the team size services themselves as well, so that they could own their own services. But as companies evolve, that's typically more a long-term dream rather than an everyday reality in a growth company.
And how big are your teams?
So teams are like ideally typically between 5 and 7 people, the typical 2-pizza team kind of thing. We start teams typically with 3 people. So the smallest teams are 3 people. The biggest teams can be up to 12 if there's a lot of mobile, like end-to-end mobile, back-end, front-end, data science and design kind of required in the area. So it depends a bit on the complexity of the problem. We optimize for as small teams as possible, really depending on what problem they're trying to solve.
And like just to imagine this, like, is a team then specific to backend, or is it specific to a certain problem that a user is solving? I can imagine that it's kind of hard if you have front end and back end, like front end being your app and back end being I don't know, a Scala service, that you like let one team give it to one team and say, okay, you're owning this because there are a lot of dependencies on the left and on the right?
Well, I think there's like few models, I think, for this one. So the teams, the kind of feature teams, or the main majority of our teams are end-to-end capable, so they can build the kind of for example, the Scala backend, the React Native front end, and the kind of whatever needed. Maybe they do some analytics integrations on the side, and the team should be able to handle this. Like, this is the idea, that the team builds this model. But then, of course, you also have like supporting teams. So you have the typical horizontal layer of things. So we have platform teams, or a developer experience team, platform or infrastructure team, data platforms, platformization, whose point is to basically enable this teams to move as fast as possible, and enable them to kind of enable them to own their own domain without having an endless amount of resources to actually solve every problem inside every team. Mm-hmm. So you have the enabling teams, and you have the kind of like more impactful teams, but you try to have the kind of feature teams to be the majority of your teams.
And the enabler teams are then like also setting like the general direction in tech, like which stack to use, and how to actually make the whole stack productive, or?
Well, I mean, I still would kind of, teams decide their own technology. So the whole idea is the team centricity in this regard. But what the central teams do is they build the support for certain technologies. So the whole idea is that you provide supported technologies. So some things that are faster to develop with. For example, with us, it's the 3 major backend technologies we are building with. And the idea is that if you want to leeway from that, you want to do something different in the teams, you have to have that understanding of the cost of your solutions. So if you want to go with Golang or Erlang or Rust, for example, for a new shiny microservice, you have to understand that you will not have the support for all the things. You will not have a login authentication libraries. You most likely won't have an eventual consistency library, or these sort of things that we build to help you build your solution. So that accountability comes from understanding the whole picture inside the team. So the kind of supporting team's idea is to really kind of build the best possible products for their customers, which are the rest of the teams. So understanding what are the big blockers for them and how can they move faster. And then we build technology for them, mostly related to infrastructure, security, authentication, compliance, like GDPR, these sort of things that are kind of like not really things you want to solve at every team, every time. I want to have a platform level smartness in them.
And do you have something like a tech radar where you put in like technologies that you want to use or you don't want to use because someone already had like a bad experience with them?
We actually just made a version of a tech radar. We haven't made it public yet, but yeah, we are kind of, even that in the true Wolt fashion of being very collaborative and very ownership driven is a communal debate on what is on that. So it is not like management decided that these are the 3 technologies that you need to use. It is about understanding what are the things we need to do to be innovative and to win in the things we need to win. So
and also profit from the experience of others, I guess, right? I mean, if someone already, let's say, tried Cassandra as a database, and you maybe were struggling with it, that you can learn from that, or?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, that's I think basics being smart. So standing on the shoulders of giants, learning from others, taking the kind of information that the industry has, and being very curious about what helps us. I mean, how we ended up in Kotlin at Wolt was, for example, we used to have Python and Scala, mostly Python because it was the founding language of Wolt, and Scala because it had good bindings for C++ for our logistics optimization. And that was kind of how we got to these 2 technologies. And as we scaled, we had new needs, and mostly on the kind of financial front and a little bit on the merchant front. And the teams themselves came up with that, hey, Kotlin would be a great, like more statically typed and kind of stronger type language that could be good for building this at scale without going with traditional Java, for being like both a bit more kind of more fun to work with and maybe better for future recruitment as well. But the teams came up with this. We made a pilot for a while with the teams, and it was a great success. So now like more than 1/3 of Wolt is Kotlin, and more every day, I think. And this came from the teams themselves. We had the debates as we always do, and now we're happily chugging along.
So very nice. Before we talk more about like how to build like performing engineering teams and how to actually measure the output and outcome, I want to step back a little to the whole idea of having a company vision and like we spoke about your goal setup and OKRs essentially, but I think like in a lot of companies, you have that setup that you maybe, I don't know, steer towards a certain goal for a quarter, but the vision for the company or your product is in a way distributed and no one really talks about it. Like you don't have it written down somewhere. How do you do this? Do you have it written down somewhere, or is it just like common knowledge that, I don't know, you want to be the best delivery company in the world or something like that?
I think vision, of course, also evolves over time. But I think we have it's the way it's like written on a Confluence page or something. It's more like in the way we communicate. So in every monthly call, in the every kind of roadmap refresh, in everything where we communicate the bigger picture, we always go back to the same big themes. So the same big vision which we have at the moment. So at the moment, the vision from a more kind of like engineering and technical perspective is to kind of the delivery of everything. So the mall in your pocket approach. There's all like on a higher level, it's making every city better and making cities more fun and livable. And how do we enable that through our technology? From a more kind of product engineering perspective, it's really about the like delivery of everything platform. And how do we get there? Having started from food delivery, as I think most in this industry have, it's more about like you realize that you have a good use case, you solve for it. It's a really good business case as well for food delivery. And then you realize that you have this delivery mesh that you can make more and more efficient over time. And then you add more use cases to it and realize retail is a great use case. And the more efficient that mesh is, the better your actual kind of a platform is. And the more things you can build for your customers, the cheaper you can do your deliveries, the better earnings your couriers can have, and the happier your merchants will be. It's like everybody wins if you have the network efficiency at a high enough level. So this is very, I think this is something reinforced at every level, and it also shows in the company goals and the way we kind of look at them going forward. So they're kind of reflected on the goal setting. But the long-term vision, that vision takes a while. So if you did food delivery for 4 or 5 years to perfect it, going to deliver of everything, we're still in the early stage. I think every player in this industry is still in the early stages of really cracking that. So we're in maybe like 22% in on being perfect in delivery of everything.
22% exactly.
I like randomly accurate metrics. So,
and how do you like you communicate your vision and changes to your vision in your monthly all hand meetings, or how do you do that? I mean, how do you do onboarding, for example? Is that something where, is it a process, like a strict process where you also teach all those things and like give people the chance to understand it, or?
Yeah, so I mean, yes, actually, nowadays we do. So growing so fast, we've been trying to be more structured also in our onboarding. But I think it's like, as I mentioned, like it is repeated in all the kind of like bigger, like where we bring everybody together. As a company, we're very big on kind of like talking about the things we do. We're very, not that good on writing everything down. We're really good at kind of communicating as we go. But for onboarding, for example, we have a kind of a information package about the culture, the way we work, the kind of values, the kind of basics of the company. We're very value driven as a company and how that goes. But then we also link up, for example, the latest all hands on deck and the latest role mapping as part of the onboarding process. So you go through the same narrative when you join the company of like, what are the biggest priorities right now? What are we building? Why are we building these things? What is the long-term view? Which is always repeated in this same material. So it's part of your onboarding process to look at like who we are, why we are, how we build things, and what are we really aiming for, which is the vision part. So it is, I think, quite well nowadays. We actually used to have this feedback that as a growing company, we grow really chaotic and too fast. It used to be that, not enough materials and it's a bit chaotic to join. Now we get the feedback we have too many things to read when you join the company, too big checklists, and it's too complex. So we probably have to find a balance as always between these two. So, but at least we've over-indexed on the right things.
It's in waves. Like everything is in waves and tech, right?
Oh yes.
Sometimes steer over a bit, and then you slow down a bit more. So, and I want to talk like about the way you do product, and the way you focus. I mean, how does that work? Do you do product discovery in large scale? Do you believe in product discovery? Do you believe in intuition? Do you measure everything? How does that Like, how do you decide on what to build?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe the overall approach as a company, Wolt has always been very data centric. So it's a very complex operational model to run. Like if you want to run this efficiently, so like everything is measured in the company from day one. We build a pretty good kind of everything from a business metrics to efficiency metrics to the kind of more customer journey side of things. So we have a lot of data in the company, but at the same time, as we started with a kind of very intuition driven founders who almost this Apple-like belief in building perfection and what does it mean to kind of get things out of it. And I think it still shows in our culture. So it's a kind of mixture of things in this regard. So we do a lot of the main point is getting maximum out of context. So we have the huge operational components. So we have a lot of feedback from the markets. Every market is different. We get a lot of like localized input for this. We do this impact mapping of those inputs. So we do this massive kind of collection of input, impact mapping, understanding what is that from a more structural perspective. So we get the kind of like operational input. Then we do user research. We do a lot of user research, also competitor analysis, but not that much because we mostly focus on what is best for our customer groups. Customer groups being merchants, couriers, consumers, all of these three in this three-way platform. Then we look at the data. So we've got user research data, operational feedback, team feedback, and intuition. So maximizing the amount of input to understand what we need to really do. But intuition does play a part, I think. I don't think you can build the best consumer experience in the world without having some vision, some part of intuition in it. Because if you just look at like output, like input metrics and kind of like the output of your own analytics, for example, you get to a local maximum. What can you kind of iterate to perfection? But you won't get to the step change. And if you want to do step change, you need to have some kind of some set of kind of more visionary aspirations on this.
Makes sense. And how big is the impact of intuition? Is it 22 or 33%?
That's a good. I think that probably varies team by team. My personal stick is 40% intuition, 30% data, and 30% user research. So you have qualitative, quantitative, and then you have you. But this is my personal one. Teams have different approaches to this as well.
Okay. And in a hypergrowth company, how do you maintain, or like how do you build and how do you maintain a company culture like yours? I mean, you seem to be quite culture driven.
Oh yes. That's a good question. I think like when you're growing, like more than half of your people are less than 6 months old when you're growing super fast, always. So a lot of it, as you also mentioned, like onboarding is one, but I think a culture has always been about like it's about how you work. Like it's not about what you write on the wall. You can have the best quote on the wall, but it's about how you really interact with each other. We have a lot of like reinforcing mechanisms for culture. So we talk about our values, we celebrate our values. In every weekly call, we do shout outs and we publicly read out loud every shout out that people submit to their whole company according to our values. So according to one of our 6 values, like excellence, then you have a shout out on excellence, and it is actually just out loud read every day. So we do these common celebrations. We also do these similar things on yearly anniversaries where you just get to gather feedback from around you just for giving you kind of good feedback about how amazing you are at that point when you've been here a year. So a lot of these kind of like recurring mechanisms that are done for culture, but also when we do look at like feedback from people, we look at culture as one of the lenses. So the values is one of the lenses when we look at for people to give feedback for like how are you doing and what you need to improve upon. And we do a continuous feedback. So we do a continuous rounds of feedback rather than trying to emphasize like once a year setup for doing feedback, especially in the kind of product and engineering space. So that's a couple of examples, but it's a lot of just like reinforcing in the act of how you work, how you solve problems. I mentioned the team ownership is one of those, like the high ownership teams, how they aim to kind of really have this ownership and accountability and this excellence in the teams themselves. Those come from our values as well. So they're all kind of aligned on the whole cultural aspect. So over-indexing on culture rather than process is something we're very big on, and distributed ownership from that. So I think it kind of feeds on itself.
And are you a remote first company, or are you mostly local and in offices?
Yeah, so we were local in offices before COVID hit, as I think most people were. But I think quite fast after that, we realized that we wanted to go with where we can get the best talent and how can we move first. So we support remote first approaches. So you can decide how you work. Do you work in in 5 different countries at the moment in product engineering. You can work in Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. You can work from an office, you can work from home, you can work partially from office, partially from home, and we will support you in whatever setup you wish. Then we fly people around to after COVID, especially if after COVID ever exists. But the idea is to at least kind of have the culture aspect of getting together and actually building trust face to face when possible.
And how often do you do that?
Well, we have this guideline that we would want to do it 2 weeks per quarter for everyone. So it really depends on the, but that's what's kind of budgeted and set at the moment. So it's quite a lot. But the whole idea is we're very culture driven as a company and want to kind of like you put culture as actions. If you don't do the actions, you don't really have the culture. But of course, due to Omicron and due to the COVID situation, we're very wary of this. So it's all voluntary, and we're figuring out, as every other company is at this point, and how it goes continuing. Personally, I really hope we can get back to this more bigger events and building culture together. We used to do this Product Plus week, for example, we did one last autumn when COVID was a little bit easier, where we flew everybody to Helsinki and just had like a week of workshopping together and having some parties and kind of building better things and culture, just to kind of understand each other better.
And do you always try to get people to Helsinki then, or do you also, I don't know, move to Barcelona every once in a while or something like that?
No, I mean, this one was in Helsinki because it was easiest to organize based on how many people wanted to travel and what was the kind of, because it was voluntary, of course, due to COVID. I think we're going to do them where it's easiest and where we have the most people. Berlin is probably the one we're going to have the next one, but it really depends on what we want to do. It's not set in a place. It's set mostly on time and where can we get people easiest. Right now, it's a pretty even split between Berlin and Helsinki for most of the people in product engineering.
Okay, so that sounds like an really like an aspirational culture you're building there. How can you make sure that, like, in a very friendly environment, how can you make sure that like people still perform, that like people are still effective and the organization is running efficiently? Like, how do you measure the output of engineering teams? How do you weight it?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of, I guess there's a couple of things to that. I think the way you kind of in a larger scale kind of ensure the excellence continuing forward is that you hire amazing people, and when you give them the freedom to build things, like, amazing people tend to know when people around them aren't amazing. So you get a lot of feedback if people aren't really kind of working as well as they should. So for example, if a team wouldn't be kind of working super well, we have a very big feedback culture, so we get the feedback from that. So I think I think that isn't really a problem as such. But if you look at like more kind of this productivity of teams side, we look at kind of output. So what do teams really ship? So we look at the kind of output of teams and rather than the input metrics. So are they creating impact? Are we solving the right problems? How well are we kind of matching the needs of our customers? Is one way of looking at it. Then you can look more into this kind of like engineering performance, but then it's really not about, like, it's really hard to measure performance in a complex space such as engineering. We are piloting actually this approach where we're trying to look at it through 3 different axes, kind of giving teams themselves a better set of tools to understand their efficiency, their performance, their operational excellence. And that is a combination of things like one of the best industry standard, not industry standard, but one of the best known ways of understanding how good engineering teams are, and what correlates to that is engineering satisfaction. Engineering satisfaction to their tools, to their setup, to their kind of product processes. So we track that. We track that quarterly actually, where we kind of track how well are we comparing to with the trends on are we happy with the kind of support structures and solutions we have. And then we look at operational excellence, which is mostly DORA metrics and accelerate metrics. So how do we look at like how fast we do like cycle time, how fast we ship into production, how many defects are there? The kind of the operational pump of release in teams. And then we look at this investment kind of categories. So trying to figure out where do we really spend the time. And that's one of my personal favorite at the moment, trying to kind of roll it out, of course, over the organization. So this, like, how much time do we spend on toil, on the things we must do to keep the platform up and running? How much do we spend on improving existing products? How much do we spend on building new products? And how much do we spend on improving or reducing the amount of toil? And these 4 axes kind of gives you an understanding of a very high level understanding of how kind of is the team, how much technical debt does the team have, and how are they really functioning. But it's something we're piloting at the moment and figuring out if there's enough gains in rolling this out across the organization. I personally believe as your organization gets big enough, there's a lot of benefit in starting to look more abstractly at the kind of the ways of excellence and efficiency in teams. But there is no single metric you can look at for something as complex as engineering.
And if you now had like a blank sheet of paper in front of you, and I would effectively, I want to do like I have a topic where I could start like a hypergrowth company, and maybe I already have 20 engineers. What would be like the 3 top tips you would give me, or recommendations you would give me for my career, to get started? Like, what should I execute first? Where should I start? Should I start measuring the performance of my engineering teams first? I know that it's a hard question, but what you do first? Work on culture, maybe?
So I think of like early stage, or like is this like before product market fit or around product market fit for your teams? Like, is it like more about scaling or finding product market fit?
It's more about scaling. It's more about scaling.
Okay, so if you found the product market fit and you have that kind of initial kind of validation that this makes sense and you want to go for that blitzscaling path, I think I think a culture is something I would start with context for the develop. Like if you want to be the best technical organization, so engineering organization, I would start with like how do you get the engineers to be as vested as possible in what they're trying to build. So how do you kind of like reduce all blockers in between the kind of like the problems, the people you're really trying to solve the problems for, and the problems and the engineering, and whether it's cultural or process or whatever way to kind of solve this, but start with this kind of very product oriented, very kind of trying to kind of have the kind of key understanding for the people building it. So you're building the culture from the perspective of who you're building it for as you're scaling, because that's the thing that sticks when you scale. Who do you solve problems for? Like you're not like in engineering, for example, it's easy to solve like things for engineering. Like you just want to build the best engineering on its own, and that means nothing when you're trying to do a growth company. Your growth company needs to win, and the market is always competitive, and you need to do the best solutions for your customers. So having that, like really, that customer and product centricity is something that I would instill in the beginning. I would do it with more cultural ways. You can do it with more process ways, but I would do it with more cultural ways, through values, through the ways of working, through people who you hire, how you set the right bar for who you hire, and how do you look at this kind of from this kind of whole cultural perspective. The other part I would do in the beginning in engineering is the craft excellence side. So making sure that the bar is just really high when you hire people. Because when you're growing a company super fast, the initial people are the ones who are championing your ways of working and your future to the future people. So even though you should always have the bar high, the first 20 people should be absolutely amazing, because those people will define for your next 400 people what amazing means. And I think that's one of those things that you kind of just, that's something we did at Wolt, I think, like really well. And we were really strict on who we hire, and we still are, but because the whole model of empowered and ownership-driven teams is that you need to be able to trust the teams to be able to execute. So they need to be of really high caliber. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. So this kind of like excellence is a part of it. So customer centricity and context first, craft excellence second, and third, a lot of funding. So so you can run as fast as possible. So that kind of, I think that would probably be a good starting point. But no, I would not start like, I don't think you should. You don't need to measure anything from a performance of teams or anything like this. You should measure your outputs, and are you actually helping your customers? Are you solving the right problems in the beginning? And how can you move as fast as possible in doing so? That's where you should start from. That's where the impact comes from. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm a very kind of like product and consumer oriented engineering leader. So it's kind of a craft excellence matters, but number one is always the value we're creating to our customers, and how do we get there? And not to each other, not to another manager or somebody else. Managers don't matter. What matters is the customer value you're creating. Everything else is secondary.
So understand the customer first is like your best and biggest advice.
And putting it next to the engineers, so every engineer should understand it. Like it's really about like getting the tech teams to understand this, having the context in the teams. I can't overemphasize this enough.
Yeah.
Magic.
So it all would start with a vision again, right? So you, in a way, look like try to make everyone understand the vision, or like maybe even like build like a write down the vision together, maybe, and then like really make sure that the customer is understood, and the craft excellence part. Like how do you make sure that you hire the right people? I mean, how does your process look like? Your hiring process look like?
So I think there's like two, three things in this regard. Like one is that you don't want to make a process that is like that is too long, because if you're blitzscaling, you need to kind of actually manage the time efforts also put into recruiting. So what we looked at, for example, at Wolt, was this like what is the minimum viable way of evaluating like people to be as excellent as they can be. And that's the approach. And the other principle we have, and which I fully believe in, which is that the interview process should be similar to actually working in the company. So it is not an evaluation process where you're alienating people and being from up high telling you something. It should be, if you're a collaborative ownership first company, it should be a collaborative ownership first process. What we do is we do typically three major steps. So we do a kind of, well, there's a screening call and typical kind of the recruiter first starting points. But we have a kind of first interview, which is a mixture of kind of leadership, cultural evaluation, this kind of more general discussion. A lot of also telling about us, like understanding why Wolt matters and what does it mean to be us, and also evaluating the kind of like ownership, kind of this ownership aspect, and how do you look at your work and at the cultural alignment. Then you have a technical interview, which is typically kind of working on a problem together. Typically, we do a home task. So a home task for engineers is one thing that kind of is really hard to bypass, because you need to look at code to understand if somebody is good at engineering. You can be good at talking about engineering, but if you don't look at code and have some referable way of kind of looking at it, it just kind of doesn't really work. And we've had really weird things where we have like some senior architects or really experienced people who fail our technical exam. And it's not a hard exam. We're not looking for any kind of, Google superstar. We're looking for people who can really just understand how to solve problems with code. And that's it. But it is essential to have some code to look at. But the technical interview, same thing. It's very pleasant. It's much about kind of discussing together, like solving a problem together. How it would be when you'd be working for us, Here's the problem with, I don't know, daylight savings time, some other annoying tidbit issue that you need to solve. And then you work on it together. And you just kind of try to solve it in a collaborative sense. And that's the way we try to evaluate teamwork.
Yeah. Is it a bigger team effort than that interview, or?
Well, I mean, we try to always involve people from the teams you will be going for. So there's you will meet your future team members also on this process. So but typically you want to have like two people and an interviewee, because otherwise the dynamic is a bit off on an interview. If you have like 7 people from your side and one interview, it's a bit of a panel that is a bit intimidating. So typically it's a few people from our side per interview. After that, there's typically a final interview, but that's like just the last step on the process. Technical side is, I think, the biggest one if you're hiring engineers, because you also evaluate a lot of culture in the technical step. So when you do technical evaluation, you also evaluate a lot about how they solve problems, how do they work together, how do they face challenges where somebody is giving them critique, how do they respond to this, how can they kind of find these ways forward. So.
I also think that is a huge chance for the candidate, actually, right? You let them interact with your real future team. I mean, the worst experience starting a new job is you have the first day and you just realize, okay, this is not working out. my team is shit. This job is shit. The tech stack is shit, and so on. So it's a good chance, right?
Oh yes. I think it's always. I mean, all interview processes are both ways. So the candidate is evaluating the company and you're evaluating the candidate. So it should always go both ways. You just also understand that it's not like you're some king in a castle waiting for somebody to come to you. You're working together on a problem and you're trying to evaluate each other along the way. And meeting the team is very important from the team perspective. The team needs to have buy-in that this is the person I want to work with. The same as for the person on the other side. It's very human-centric in the end. But at the same time, you need to evaluate the kind of hard skills so that you actually get the great people.
Okay. So I'm coming to my outro questions already. As we already spent like almost an hour together. You're more of a book person still. I decided to ask you for a crazy tool that right now makes your day. I mean, something that makes you more efficient. It could also be like a tool you just use for yourself, like not a technical tool, but methodology you adopted and you feel more productive with it? What is it?
No, I think as nowadays I mostly do hand waving instead of technical work because there's a big organization to run. Not that many technical tools nowadays. I think the one thing that I actually just use, I use to-do lists a lot. So I use Todoist, and that's my favorite tool at the moment because because there's so much context, there's so many work streams going at the same time. So I make holistic to-do lists of everything. And then I time them and put them on some time schedule. And then every time I get back to them, I either postpone them or solve them. And I think it's one of those kind of, you run out of buffer when you have too wide a context at some point as a person. You run out of buffer. So you need to make a queue solution. And the queue solution can be whatever. It can be a notes. It can be whatever. There are many different tooling in this productivity category. But the main point is having a queue where you can offload your thoughts and then get back to them. And I've tried many different things. And this open source tool called Dendron that was overly complex and wonderful because you could develop it like a programmer. But in the end, I figured something simple is enough for this. But yeah,
it also comes in waves, right? To-do lists also come in waves, and productivity also comes in waves, right? I remember me trying GTD a while ago, and then I don't know, going through my to-do list every day and stuff like that, where half of my day was spent on that.
I went away from to-do lists for a couple of years, I think, and I used personal Jira projects. I tried different sort of tooling, and I was or writing documents, or or using calendar to be holistically the place where you put some notes, but nothing really I like a simple to-do list that has a good scheduling functionality. That is enough. I mean, there's tons of methodology, but it's really most about how do you manage your time and your focus, and that's in a more kind of at least in more leadership roles, because you tend to have a really wide context. There's too many work streams that you need to follow, so you need to have some way of kind of offloading content from your brain. This is the way I look at it, but it's very personal. I'm sure everybody has their own tips and tricks to be more productive.
I guess so too. Yeah. I recently discovered focus time and try to really block a lot of my time in my calendar, which is urgently needed.
I love focus time. Unfortunately, somebody always books on top of it, so it's like a free form. It's like a free for all time at the moment, but it is a good one as well.
So then I still have a little surprise for you. So Miki Kuzi, one of your co-founders of Wolt, actually told me about a hidden feature that he built into the Wolt app at a very early time. It's actually you have to hit a certain icon for 6 times, and then you unlock a feature, an Easter egg in the time picker, like when to deliver food, so that you can actually select a time in the past and just travel to that time. And instead of ordering a pizza, we now try to travel to this day 6 years ago. We pick the time and just travel there and observe yourself for a while, your younger self for a while. And now you have the chance to whisper something into your younger self's ears. What would it be?
Oh man. That's a tough question. What would I whisper to my younger self's ears? I don't know. Probably, I would probably whisper that you don't have to take everything so seriously. You know, things have a tendency to go kind of be all right. We had a lot of bumps on the road for Wolt from those early days onwards, as every growth company has, where you kind of almost running out of funding, and there are all sorts of tough situations along the way. And I think it's like one of the things that you learn along the way. I think it's just that there's always burning fires. There's always chaos. In a growth company, nothing is ever clear. Everything is a bit chaotic. And if you try to make too much sense of the chaos, you'll probably just go mad. So you need to find a balance of how do you balance kind of this uncertainty, and how do you? And I think I would probably just be like, it's gonna be okay. You just enjoy the ride. That's what I would tell myself, because it's a wonderful ride.
I can imagine. So thanks a lot for your time today. It was really a pleasure talking to you, and great insights that you gave, Niilo. I hope we have the chance in the future to elaborate a bit more on Wolt. And I wish you guys big success. I mean, you already have big success, but continue to grow and have a lot of fun on the way.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here. And remember, if you're especially in Berlin and you kind of want to join a great tech company, we're hiring a lot of people. Come join us.
Talk to
My
Niilo.
shameless self-promotion in the end. Isn't this like the way to go?
That's how it goes. Thanks a lot, Niilo. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Alphalist podcast. If you like this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. Alphalist is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to cto@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on Alphalist, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.